A wrong number usually ends with an awkward apology. For Linda H. Huffman, it ended with blood and power. Barricaded in a pitch-black hallway, listening to a man with a hatchet dismantle her only exit, she tried to text her father one last goodbye. Her hands were shaking too hard. She mistyped one digit. That message didn't go to her retired cop father. It went to the private line of George F. Doolin, the city's most feared mafia kingpin. A number that hadn't been used for anything sentimental in over a decade. What happens when a terrified woman accidentally summons the monster who eats other monsters? The answer is brutal, possessive, and irreversible. This is the story of They're Breaking Down the Door. The sound of splintering wood is louder than any gunshot. It isn't a clean crack like a breaking branch. It is a wet, shrieking groan as layers of oak panel separate, splinter, and collapse inward. Each swing of the hatchet sends a shockwave through the frame, rattling the deadbolt Linda H. Huffman had thrown just 90 seconds earlier. She heard the first breach before she saw it. Then the blade punched through at eye level, and she stopped breathing. Linda was crouched in the hallway between her bedroom and bathroom, knees pulled to her chest, phone clutched in both hands. The screen's blue glow painted her face in harsh angles, wet cheeks, wild eyes, a thin line of blood trickling from her hairline where she'd slammed into the doorframe running from the living room. Linda, open the fucking door. The voice outside was breathless, giddy wrong. Danny Resnick, the enforcer for the Southside crew who'd been following her for 3 weeks. The man she'd rejected outside a coffee shop, then again outside her gym, then again in the parking lot of her building. You think a deadbolt stops me? Do you think anything stops me? Another swing. Another splintering crash. The hatchet blade twisted, prying the wood apart like ribs. Linda knew what was coming. She'd grown up the daughter of a cop. She knew the statistics on stalking cases. She knew that when men like Danny Resnick moved from following to breaking, there was no de-escalation. There was only before and after. She was living in the last 60 seconds before. Her phone was already open to messages. She didn't have time to call 911, they'd never arrive in time, and Danny had friends in the department anyway. She needed her father, Michael Huffman, retired detective, the only man who'd ever made her feel safe. She tried to type his number from memory. She deleted his contact months ago when Danny first started appearing places he shouldn't. She didn't want him finding Dad's information if he ever got her phone. 3-1-5-5-5. Her thumb was slick with blood from where she'd bitten her lip. The screen was cracked from when she dropped it during her sprint to the door. 0-1-9-8. Another crash. The wood around the lock was giving way. She could see Danny's shadow moving through the widening hole, hear his panting, smell the cigarettes and sweat. She needed 0-1-9-8. Her father's last 4 digits. Her thumb slipped. Hit 1 to 9 instead. Then autocorrect suggested a number she'd never seen before. In her panic, she didn't notice. She just typed the only thing that mattered. They're breaking down the door. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. I love you, Dad. She hit send. The hatchet punched through again, and this time the entire lock assembly tore free from the frame. Linda pressed herself against the wall, waiting for the end. Her phone buzzed. The reply wasn't a question. It wasn't confusing. It was 4 words, written in the tone of a man who'd given 1,000 tactical commands and expected each one to be obeyed without hesitation. Deadbolt it. I'm 2 minutes out. Linda stared at the screen. That wasn't her father's number. That wasn't her father's voice. Her father would have said, "Lock yourself in the bathroom, call 911, I'm calling it in." This was something else. Someone else. The door exploded inward. Danny Resnick stepped through, hatchet raised, grinning like a man who'd finally won a game he'd been playing alone. Linda's phone buzzed again. 1 minute 40 seconds. Don't open the door for anyone but me. She didn't know who George F. Doolin was, but she could feel the weight of his words through the screen. A gravitational pull. A promise that was also a threat. She looked up at Danny, standing in her destroyed doorway, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she wasn't sure which monster she should be more afraid of. The one with the hatchet, Or the one she just accidentally summoned from the dark? If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to 2,000 and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. Danny took one step into the hallway and stopped. Not because he saw Linda pressed against the wall like prey. Not because he suddenly developed a conscience. He stopped because his phone rang. Linda watched his face change. The manic grin flickered. He pulled the phone from his jacket pocket, glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. Yeah. His voice had lost its playful edge. Someone on the other end was talking fast. Danny's eyes cut to Linda, then away. I'm busy. Tell Vigile. He stopped. Listen. How the fuck would I know? I'm not on the north side. He hung up. But the interruption had given Linda 30 seconds. 30 seconds to crawl backward toward her bedroom door, phone still clutched in her shaking hands. Danny turned back to her, hatchet hanging loose at his side now, more annoyed than excited. Her phone buzzed. 1 minute 15 seconds. Get away from the entry point. Linda didn't question it. She rolled sideways into her bedroom doorway just as Danny lunged forward. The hatchet buried itself in the drywall where her head had been, sending up a cloud of white dust. Stop fucking moving. Danny wrenched the blade free, breathing hard. He wasn't grinning anymore. The hunt had taken too long. This was supposed to be simple. Break in, teach her a lesson about respect, leave before anyone noticed. But now he was sweating, his hands slick on the hatchet handle, and somewhere in the back of his predator brain, a warning light had started blinking. Linda's phone buzzed again. 45 seconds. Is there a second exit? Her thumbs were shaking so badly she could barely type. She managed one word. Fire escape. Bedroom window. The reply was instant. Lock yourself in. Move furniture against the door. I'm handling the window. Danny had reached her bedroom threshold. He saw her on the floor by the window, phone glowing in her hands, and something about that made him smile again. Texting for help? Who's gonna come, Linda? Your daddy? He's an hour away. He raised the hatchet. I've got 5 minutes. Linda shoved herself against the radiator beneath the window, eyes locked on Danny's silhouette. She didn't have furniture to move. She didn't have time. She had 15 seconds, maybe less, and a stranger on the other end of a wrong number, who was either her last hope or a new nightmare waiting to begin. Her phone buzzed one final time. I'm here. Close your eyes. Linda slammed her eyes shut. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass and winter air. She heard a sound like a nail gun, 3 suppressed cracks in rapid succession. Danny made a noise that wasn't quite a scream, more like the air being let out of something that used to be human. Then a wet, heavy thump as his body hit the hallway floor. Silence. Footsteps. Slow, measured, expensive shoes on broken glass. A voice, low and cold, spoke from somewhere near the window. Linda H. Huffman. You can open your eyes now. She did. George F. Doolan stood backlit by the streetlights outside, snow dusting his black overcoat, a suppressed submachine gun held with the casual competence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. He wasn't even breathing hard. He looked at her, then at Danny's body in the hallway, then back at her. You texted the wrong number, he said. But I came anyway. George didn't wait for Linda to respond. He stepped over the windowsill with the fluid economy of someone who'd entered buildings through unconventional means more times than he could count. His eyes swept the bedroom once, cataloging exits, sight lines, potential threats, then fixed on the hallway beyond. How many? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. Linda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She was still staring at Danny's body, at the dark pool spreading across her hallway floor, at the hatchet lying 3 feet from his outstretched hand. George crouched in front of her, blocking her view. Up close, he was older than she'd expected. Maybe 45, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled rarely and meant it never. How many men came with him? I don't know. I only saw Danny. Danny. George repeated the name like he was filing it away. He pulled a phone from his coat, not the one she'd texted, a different one, and pressed a single button. When someone answered, he didn't bother with greetings. Doolin. I need a cleanup crew at. He glanced at Linda. What's the address? She told him. Her voice sounded distant, detached, like it belonged to someone else. George relayed the information and ended the call. Then he rose and moved toward the hallway, weapon raised, each step deliberate. Linda watched him approach Danny's corpse with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a patient. He nudged the body with his shoe, checked the pockets, pulled out a phone and a wallet. Southside crew, George said, more to himself than to Linda. He pocketed Danny's phone and moved toward the destroyed front door, checking angles, listening. Linda heard it then, what George had already detected. Footsteps on the stairwell. Voices. At least 2, maybe 3. Danny hadn't come alone after all. He'd just been stupid enough to go in first. George's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He touched something on his coat, an earpiece Linda hadn't noticed, and spoke in a dialect she didn't recognize. Russian, maybe, or something Eastern European. The response in his ear made him nod once. He turned back to Linda, still crouched by the radiator. Stay there. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Then he disappeared into the hallway. Linda heard the front door creak. Heard someone say, Danny, you done playing or? The suppressed gunfire was quieter than in the movies. 3 shots. A body hitting the floor. Someone cursed in surprise. 2 more shots. Silence. Footsteps retreating down the stairwell, fast and panicked. George's measured stride follows. Another burst of gunfire farther away now. Then nothing. Linda counted her heartbeats. Lost track around 40. George reappeared in her bedroom doorway. Snow melting on his shoulders, weapon held low. He wasn't bleeding. Wasn't even breathing hard. He looked at her the way someone might look at a stray dog they'd found in the rain. Calculation behind sympathy. Already running the numbers on what keeping her would cost. 3 more in the stairwell. 1 made it to the street. He won't make it to his car. George checked his watch. My people will be here in 4 minutes. You need to decide something right now, Linda. She found her voice. Decide what? Whether you're coming with me, or whether you're staying here to explain 4 bodies to the police. His eyes were cold, flat, utterly pragmatic. Because if you stay, you're a witness to a mob execution. And witnesses have a very short life expectancy in this city. Linda looked at Danny's body. At her destroyed door. At the blood on her hands. Hers and his, mixed together now, impossible to separate. That's not really a choice, she whispered. George almost smiled. The breach happened at 2:47 a.m. on the 4th night. Linda woke to the sound of George's voice in the hallway, sharp and low, speaking in that same Eastern European dialect she'd heard the night he killed Danny. She pulled on a robe and cracked open her door. George stood in the main room, phone pressed to his ear, staring at a bank of security monitors that had risen from a hidden panel in the wall. Svetlana was beside him in a nightgown and combat boots, a pistol held low against her thigh. 3 other men Linda recognized from her training sessions had materialized from somewhere, all armed, all watching the screens with the intensity of soldiers expecting contact. How long? George said into the phone. A pause. Then we have less time than I thought. He ended the call and turned to find Linda watching from the doorway. Get dressed. We're leaving. What's happening? Someone just accessed my security system remotely. They shut down the biometric scanners on the private elevator for exactly 8 seconds. Long enough to clone the access codes. George was already moving, pulling on a shoulder holster, checking the magazine of a compact pistol. They didn't come up. This was a test. They wanted to see if they could. Linda felt her pulse spike. The traitor. Or someone working for them. George handed Svetlana a tablet. Pull the footage from the lobby cameras for the last 72 hours. Cross-reference with known associates of the Volkov syndicate. Volkov. Linda had heard that name twice in the past 3 days, always spoken like a curse. The rival organization is trying to move into George's territory. The ones who'd been probing his operations, testing his defenses, looking for weaknesses. One of the men, Mikhail, she remembered, the one with the scarred eyebrow who'd driven them here, spoke in Russian. George responded in the same language, then switched back to English for Linda's benefit. Mikhail says the building's security detail found a device on the fiber optic line in the basement. Military-grade signal interceptor. How long has it been there? Unknown. Could be days. Could be weeks. George's jaw was tight, and Linda realized this was what fury looked like on a man who'd learned to control every micro-expression. They've been watching us. Listening. They know you're here. The weight of that settled over the room like a physical thing. The gala was in 2 days. The plan had been to introduce Linda publicly, force the traitor to make their move in a controlled environment. But if the rival syndicate already knew about her, if they'd been surveilling the penthouse, then the element of surprise was gone. So what do we do? Linda's voice was steadier than she expected. George looked at her and something passed between them. An understanding maybe, or a recognition. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking what came next. We go to ground, he said. There's a secondary location. Completely off book. No electronic footprint. Only 3 people know about it. 3 people, Linda repeated. Including your traitor. George's expression went cold. Including my traitor. Svetlana was already packing bags with the efficiency of someone who'd evacuated under fire before. The men moved through the penthouse in a coordinated sweep, gathering equipment, wiping hard drives, preparing for a rapid extraction. Linda went back to her room and dressed in the tactical clothing Svetlana had shown her yesterday. Dark jeans, boots, a jacket with reinforced panels. When she came out, George handed her the Glock 19 she'd been training with, this time loaded. Stay close, he said. And if someone tells you to shoot, you shoot. They took the freight elevator down to the sub-basement, bypassing the compromised private lift. The Mercedes was waiting, engine running. As they pulled out into the pre-dawn darkness, Linda looked back at the tower. The fortress wasn't safe anymore, which meant nowhere was. The safe house was 40 minutes outside the city, buried in a stretch of industrial wasteland where abandoned warehouses rotted beside freight rail lines that hadn't seen a train in years. George directed Mikhail through a series of turns that seemed random until Linda realized they were doubling back, checking for tails, using the terrain to their advantage. The building itself was unremarkable. A 2-story brick structure with boarded windows and a rusted chain-link fence. But when Mikhail punched a code into a hidden panel, a reinforced steel door rolled open to reveal something else entirely. Concrete walls. Emergency lighting. A weapons cache that could have armed a small militia. Victor built this in the 90s, George said as they entered. Back when paranoia was justified. He moved to a terminal in the corner and began typing. We have redundant power, water filtration, and enough supplies to last 3 months if necessary. Linda watched him work. Watched the way his shoulders had relaxed incrementally now that they were behind walls he trusted. You said 3 people know about this place. Myself, Svetlana, and Andrei Volkov, my former partner, before he decided he'd rather be my enemy. George's fingers paused over the keyboard. If the traitor is feeding information to the Volkov syndicate, they'll know we're here within hours. Then why did we come? Because I'm tired of running. George turned to face her. And because I want them to come. On my terms this time. The attack came at dawn. Linda had been asleep on a cot in what passed for a break room when the sound of automatic gunfire shattered the silence. She rolled off the cot, grabbed the Glock from under her pillow, and moved toward the sound on instinct. George was at the main entrance, firing through a reinforced slit in the door. Mikhail was at a second position, covering a side approach. Svetlana was on the terminal, tracking thermal signatures through exterior cameras. 6 hostiles, Svetlana called out. 3 advancing on the main entrance, 2 flanking east, 1 holding position at the vehicle. George's weapon clicked empty. He ejected the magazine with practiced efficiency and slapped in a fresh one. They're not trying to breach. They're pinning us. Linda understood before he finished the sentence. This wasn't an assault. It was a setup. Keep them busy at the front while someone else. The explosion came from the rear of the building, where the auxiliary exit was supposed to be sealed. The blast wave knocked Linda sideways into a wall. Her ears rang. Smoke filled the corridor. Through the haze she saw figures moving. 3 men in tactical gear, advancing with the coordinated precision of professionals. George was already engaging, dropping the first one with 2 shots center mass. Mikhail took the second, but the third got through. Linda saw it happen in slow motion. The gunman's weapon swung toward George's exposed side. George turned, but not fast enough. The muzzle flash. The impact that spun George backward. He went down hard. The gunman shifted aim toward Mikhail. Linda didn't think. She raised the Glock, exhaled like George had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. The gunman collapsed. Linda's hands were shaking again, but she kept the weapon up, scanning for more threats. When none came, she ran to George. He was conscious, hand pressed against his left shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Vest caught most of it, he rasped. But I think the round deflected through the gap. Svetlana was already beside them with a trauma kit. We need to evacuate. They'll have more coming. No, George said through clenched teeth. We hold here. This is where we make our stand. Mikhail appeared at the corridor entrance. We have a problem. The vehicles are gone. They disabled them before the assault. George's face went pale. Not from pain. From realization. They were trapped. Svetlana worked on George's shoulder with steady hands while Linda stood watch at the blown entrance. The smoke was clearing, revealing the pre-dawn gray outside. No movement yet, but she could feel them out there. Waiting. Regrouping. How many rounds do you have left? George's voice was strained but steady. Linda checked her magazine. 8. Mikhail. 40, maybe 50. Mikhail was dragging bodies away from the entrance, creating a makeshift barricade. But they know we're low. They'll wait us out or bring more men. George tried to sit up. Svetlana pushed him back down. You move, you bleed faster. Stay. We can't stay, George said. They'll breach again, and this time we won't have the ammunition to hold them. Linda turned from the entrance, an idea forming. What if we don't have to hold them? George looked at her. Explain. You taught me to read people, to see what they expect. Linda moved closer, her mind racing through everything she'd learned in the past 4 days. They think we're cornered. They think we're defensive. They're expecting us to fortify and wait for rescue. We don't have rescue coming, Mikhail said flatly. Exactly. So we do what they don't expect. Linda knelt beside George. The building has multiple levels, right? Upper floors. Storage and office space. Mostly empty. Not anymore. Linda stood, adrenaline sharpening her thoughts. We make them think we're holding position here. Then we move upstairs and turn this place into a kill box. George studied her face, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. You want to funnel them. I want to make them think they've won. Linda grabbed a tactical vest from the weapons cache, started loading spare magazines into the pouches with movements that were becoming automatic. Mikhail keeps them engaged at this entrance. We go dark upstairs, set positions with clear sight lines. When they breach, thinking we're pinned, we're above them. That's half a plan, Svetlana said. What about the vehicles? Linda looked at George. You said this place has redundant systems. Does that include communications? Hardline terminal in the office upstairs. Can't be intercepted. Then we call in your people. Give them a location to extract us from. Linda checked her weapon, ejected the magazine, reseated it. George's ritual, now hers. But we need to buy time. George was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded to Mikhail. Give her the flashbangs. And the claymore from the cache. Mikhail's scarred eyebrow lifted. You trust her with that? She just saved my life. George's eyes never left Linda's face. Yes. 20 minutes later, Linda was positioned in the upper floor office, prone behind an overturned desk with clear sight lines to the entrance below. Mikhail had rigged the corridor with a claymore aimed at chest height, controlled by a clacker in Linda's left hand. Her right held the Glock. She could see them now through the shattered windows. Shadows moving between rusted machinery. At least 8 men, maybe more. They were advancing in a tactical spread, confident. One of them stepped into a shaft of early light, and Linda's breath caught. She knew that face. Not from the past 4 days. From before. From the coffee shop where Danny had first cornered her. From the parking lot where she'd started seeing the same cars following her home. This wasn't random. The Volkov syndicate hadn't just hacked George's security. They'd been the ones pushing Danny, watching her, waiting for an excuse to draw George out into the open. She'd never been a wrong number. She'd been bait all along. Linda felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Something else. Something George had been teaching her to recognize and weaponize. Rage. The men reached the entrance. Started moving through, weapons raised, thinking they had the advantage. Linda squeezed the clacker. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The claymore shredded the first 3 men before they could process what was happening. The survivors scattered, returning blind fire toward positions Linda had already abandoned. She moved to her secondary position, saw a target silhouetted against the doorway, and fired. The man dropped. From across the room, Svetlana's weapon cracked twice. 2 more down. The remaining men broke. Started retreating. Linda let them go, watched them drag wounded toward the fence line. They'd learned what George already knew. She wasn't a victim anymore. The gala happened 3 weeks later, in a ballroom that dripped crystal and old money. George's shoulder had healed enough to wear the tuxedo without visible discomfort, though Linda noticed the slight stiffness when he moved. She noticed everything now. The traitor had been Dmitry Petrov, George's logistics coordinator. The one who'd known about the safe house. The one who'd been feeding the Volkov syndicate information for 18 months, thinking he could orchestrate a quiet coup. He disappeared the day after the warehouse siege. They found him 2 days later in a shipping container at the docks, a single bullet in the back of his head. George never said he'd given the order. He didn't have to. Now Linda stood at his side in a black dress that cost more than 6 months of her old rent, a diamond on her finger that was real enough to make the society wives stare. They'd announced the engagement in the society pages 3 days ago. The response had been immediate: invitations, congratulations, and the sudden interest of every power broker in the city who wanted to know who Linda Huffman was and where she'd come from. "They're watching you," George murmured, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back. "Third table from the left. Andrei Volkov and his lieutenants." Linda didn't turn her head. She'd learned that too. Let them watch. Andrei Volkov was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with white hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome before violence and paranoia carved it into something harder. He raised his champagne glass toward them. A toast. Or a threat. George returned the gesture with cold precision. "He's the one who sent Danny after me," Linda said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And the men at the warehouse? Also him." George's voice dropped lower. "He thought you were a weakness. A civilian I'd gotten sentimental about." His fingers tightened slightly against her dress. He was wrong on both counts. Linda turned to look at him. In the ballroom light, George F. Doolin looked exactly like what he was, a kingpin, a predator, a man who'd built an empire on calculated violence. But she saw the other things too now. The exhaustion behind his eyes. The weight of a crown that never came off. The loneliness of being the monster everyone feared. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we dance. We smile. We let everyone in this room see that you're not going anywhere." George extended his hand. "And tomorrow we will start taking back what Volkov tried to steal." Linda took his hand, let him lead her onto the floor. The orchestra was playing something classical, something she didn't recognize. It didn't matter. She moved with him, matched his rhythm, aware of every eye in the room tracking them. "I've been thinking," Linda said as they turned, "about the night I texted you." "What about it?" "You said Victor was trying to tell you something. Maybe he sent me to you for a reason." She looked up at him. "I think he did. Not to save me. To save you." George's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "From what?" "From being alone." Linda's voice was steady, certain. "You said it yourself. Control is an illusion. Power is. But partnership." She let the word hang between them. "That's real." The music swelled. George pulled her closer, and for just a moment the mask slipped. She saw the man underneath. The one who'd answered a wrong number at 2 in the morning, because he couldn't ignore a cry for help. The one who'd taught a terrified woman how to stop being afraid. "You understand what this means," George said quietly. "Standing with me. There's no going back to who you were." Linda thought about her destroyed apartment, about Danny's grin and the hatchet breaking through her door, about the woman who'd sent that desperate text to a ghost. That woman was dead. "I don't want to go back," she said. The song ended. The ballroom erupted in polite applause. George kept his hand on hers for one beat longer than necessary, then stepped back and offered his arm. Across the room, Andrei Volkov was watching them with the expression of a man who just realized he'd made a fatal miscalculation. Linda smiled. Not the frightened smile of someone pretending to be brave. The smile of someone who'd learned to weaponize her fear and turn it into something sharper. George saw it. "Ready." Linda took his arm. Felt the weight of the Glock in the custom holster beneath her dress. Felt the diamond on her finger catch the light. "I've been ready since you answered the phone." They walked toward Volkov's table together. King and queen. Partners. Equals. The city was waiting. And this time Linda H. Huffman was done running. "No, it isn't." The car was a black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. George opened the rear door and waited. Linda climbed in, moving like someone in a dream, her hands still trembling. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil. George slid in beside her. The driver, a man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, didn't ask questions. He simply pulled away from the curb as 2 white vans arrived behind them, men in coveralls already moving toward Linda's building with the practiced efficiency of a team that had done this before. Linda watched her apartment disappear through the rear window. Watched the only life she'd known for 3 years vanish into the winter night. She should have felt something. Terror. Grief. Relief. Instead, she felt hollowed out, empty except for the dull throb where she'd hit her head. "Where are we going?" Her voice sounded small. "Somewhere safe." George was texting on one of his phones, the third one she'd seen him use. "Somewhere Danny Resnick's friends can't reach you." The city scrolled past. They drove north away from her neighborhood, into streets where the buildings grew taller and the lights grew brighter. The financial district. Linda had only been here twice, both times feeling like an imposter among the men in $1,000 suits. The Mercedes descended into an underground garage beneath a glass tower that rose 40 stories into the night. The driver stopped at a private elevator with a biometric scanner. George pressed his thumb to the sensor and the doors opened immediately. They rode in silence. Linda watched the numbers climb. 20, 30, 35. The elevator didn't stop until 40. The doors opened onto a penthouse that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a sprawling landscape of light and shadow. The furniture was minimal, expensive, chosen by someone who valued function over comfort. Everything was black, white, or chrome. George shrugged off his coat and handed it to someone Linda hadn't noticed, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Svetlana, this is Linda Huffman. She'll be staying with us. Get her cleaned up and fed." Svetlana nodded once and gestured for Linda to follow. But Linda didn't move. She was staring at George, at this man who'd killed 4 people to save her, who'd whisked her away to a fortress in the sky, who still hadn't explained the only thing that mattered. Why did you come? The question escaped before she could stop it. That text, it wasn't meant for you. You didn't know me. You didn't know me anything. So why? George set his phone down on a glass table. He looked at her with those flat, pragmatic eyes, and for the first time she saw something behind them. Not warmth. Not kindness. Something older and more complicated. The number you texted, he said slowly, hasn't been active in 12 years. It belonged to my mentor, a man named Viktor Sokolov. He paused, and Linda realized he was choosing his words carefully, like each one cost something. Viktor raised me, taught me everything I know. He died in 2014, and I kept that line open. A tribute. A superstition. I don't understand. Neither do I. George picked up his phone again, already moving on to the next crisis, the next decision. But when I saw that text, a woman in terror, begging for help on a dead man's number, I decided Viktor was trying to tell me something. He looked at her one more time. Maybe he was right. Svetlana touched Linda's elbow gently. Come. You need medical attention. Linda followed, but she looked back once. George was standing at the window, phone pressed to his ear, silhouetted against the city he controlled from shadows. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom, or a prisoner staring at the walls of his cage. She wasn't sure which frightened her more. Svetlana cleaned the cut on Linda's forehead with antiseptic that stung worse than the original injury. She worked in silence, efficient and thorough, then left Linda alone in a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment had been. The bed was made with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything was pristine, untouched, waiting. Linda sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. She wasn't sure when. The knock came an hour later. George entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one and sat in the chair across from the bed, maintaining the careful distance of someone who understood the optics of being alone with a traumatized woman. You should drink that, he said. It'll help. Linda took a sip. Burn going down, but he was right. It helped. George watched her for a moment, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We need to talk about what happens next. I assumed you'd tell me when I could go home. You don't have a home anymore. His voice wasn't cruel, just factual. Danny Resnick was an enforcer for the Southside crew. They don't forget. They don't forgive. And they sure as hell don't let someone kill 4 of their own without retaliation. Linda felt the whiskey turn sour in her stomach. But you killed them. Not me. They don't know that. All they know is Danny went to your apartment and never came back. George took a drink from his own glass. In their eyes, you're either dead or you're a problem. And if you surface anywhere in this city, they'll make sure you're the first one. So what am I supposed to do? Hide here forever? No. George set his glass down with a soft click. You're going to help me with a problem. And in return, I'm going to make you untouchable. Linda laughed. It came out bitter and sharp. I don't know what you think I can do for someone like you. You're going to be my fiancé. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Linda stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. Excuse me. George stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. I have a traitor in my organization. Someone close. Someone feeding information to my competitors, trying to orchestrate a coup. He turned to face her. I've narrowed it down to 3 people. All of them will be at a charity gala in 5 days. All of them believe I'm too isolated, too paranoid to ever bring someone into my inner circle. So you want me to be bait. I want you to be credible. George's eyes were hard. A man like me doesn't introduce a fiancée unless she matters. Unless she's vulnerable. My traitor will see that and they'll make a move, either to use you against me or to eliminate you as a liability. Either way, they'll reveal themselves. Linda stood up, her legs unsteady. You're asking me to pretend to be in love with you, So someone tries to kill me. I'm offering you a choice. George's voice dropped lower, colder. You can stay here, hide, live in this gilded cage until my enemies forget about you, which they won't. Or you can step into the fire with me and come out the other side as someone they'll never dare touch again. He moved closer, and Linda could smell the gun oil still clinging to his shirt. In my world, nothing is free. I saved your life tonight. This is the price. Linda looked at the window at the city spread out 40 stories below. She thought about her destroyed apartment, about Danny's grin in the hallway, about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. How long do I have to decide? George checked his watch. You already did. The moment you got in my car. He finished his whiskey and walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. Svetlana will bring you appropriate clothing tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do before Saturday. He left. The door closed with a soft final click. Linda stood alone in the pristine room, holding an empty glass, and realized she'd just agreed to become engaged to a man whose last name she'd only learned 3 hours ago. A man who'd killed 4 people without blinking. A man who might be the only thing standing between her and death. The lesson started the next morning. Linda woke to find Svetlana standing at the foot of her bed with a tray of coffee and a garment bag draped over her arm. Mr. Doolin expects you in the study in 20 minutes. The dress was black, simple, and expensive. Fit perfectly. Linda wondered how he'd known her size, then decided she didn't want to know. George was waiting behind a mahogany desk, reading something on a tablet. He glanced up when she entered, assessed her appearance in one efficient sweep, and nodded. Sit. Linda sat in the chair across from him. The study was all dark wood and leather, books lining the walls. First editions, she noticed, not the kind meant to be read. Tell me what you see when you look at me, George said. I don't understand. You're about to become my fiancé. That means attending events, meeting people who will smile at you while calculating how to use you. You need to learn how to read a room. He leaned back in his chair. So tell me, what do you see? Linda studied him. The expensive suit, tailored perfectly. The watch, understated, but she recognized the brand. The way he held himself, relaxed but ready like a coiled spring. You're in control. You want people to know it. Wrong. George stood and walked around the desk. I want people to think I'm in control. There's a difference. Control is an illusion in my world. The moment you believe you have it, someone takes it from you. He stopped in front of her. Look at my hands. She did. They were clean, manicured, but there were scars across the knuckles. Old ones. I grew up fighting for everything, George said quietly. Food. Territory. Respect. These hands killed my first man when I was 16. But no one at the gala on Saturday will see that. They'll see a gentleman in a Tom Ford suit. He held her gaze. That's the lesson. Everyone is wearing a mask. Your job is to see behind it. For the next 3 days, George taught her how to survive in his world. He brought in associates, men and women from his organization, and had Linda practice reading them. She learned to spot tells. The way someone's eyes darted left when they lied. The forced smile that didn't reach the eyes. The hesitation before answering a simple question. Ricardo, George said, gesturing to a man in his 30s with slicked back hair and an easy smile. Tell Linda about your weekend. Ricardo launched into a story about taking his daughter to the zoo. Linda watched his hands. They were still, too still, clasped in front of him like he was restraining himself. He's lying, Linda said. George raised an eyebrow. Why? He's holding his hands to keep them from moving. People who tell the truth gesture. They relax. He's working too hard to look comfortable. Ricardo's smile faltered. George nodded. Good. Ricardo spent his weekend cleaning up a mess in the warehouse district. No daughter. No zoo. He dismissed Ricardo with a wave. You're learning. But the hardest lesson came on the 3rd night. George handed Linda a Glock 19, emptied of ammunition. Hold it. She took it, the weight foreign and terrible in her hands. You'll never be a victim again. George said, his voice like iron. Because victims wait for someone to save them. You're going to save yourself. He spent 2 hours teaching her how to stand, how to aim, how to breathe through the fear. When he finally took the gun back, Linda's hands were steady. She looked at him, this man who was reshaping her into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. What if I don't want to become this? George's expression didn't change. Then you'll die as the person you were. Your choice. Linda thought about Danny's grin, about the hatchet breaking through her door, about 3 years spent jumping at shadows. Again, she said, reaching for the gun. George almost smiled. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as I can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Please don't forget to subscribe.